Hi guys, so I'm gonna come right out of the gates with a spoiler. I think the majority of people, when they see that the conversation today is supposed to be about time, thought that you'd be getting some awesome tips on how to maximize your time and how to be super efficient and how to be extremely productive in your work. But I'm just gonna come out with a confession and say that's just not my area of expertise by any means. And so I'm not gonna pretend that I have some perfect answer for you regarding that area of time. But anyone who knows me, I'm kind of infamous for pulling all-nighters and working right up until deadlines, because if there's anything I'm good at, it's taking my time. So that's actually going to be today's topic is going to be that good things take time and that it's a process and it's a journey. For me, there's nothing really that demonstrates the idea that the process takes time than the process of finding a career. I actually never intended on being a calligrapher. That's what I do. I'm a calligrapher and illustrator here in San Diego, but I never thought I'd do that. And honestly, I was kind of running from that vocation my whole life. I wanted to do something, I wanted to have a career where the purpose of my life, or like how much meaning of my life was having, or how much impact it was having, could be measured. So from a young age, I decided that I was going to be a cardiac surgeon. And so I was like on that path, thought I was going to be a surgeon, was going to go to med school, and everyone, was like, that's a future doctor. But I kept getting distracted along the way. And I got distracted by these amazing nonprofits like Invisible Children, like the Aja Project, like by amazing artists like JR and by Ai Weiwei. I started to see that there were artists around me in my community who were significantly impacting and inspiring me, and also were inspiring a lot of people around me. So that kind of opened up some questions and kind of this battle between my heart and my mind, where my brain was saying, Suzy, if you become a surgeon, you will save so many lives. But my heart was saying, but art is important and it's inspiring and it's actually really powerful in a lot of people's lives. And once I kind of opened myself up to that journey and those questions, it got pretty messy. I'm not gonna pretend like everything just fell into place and I just became a calligrapher and was successful and acclaimed. That's not at all the story. The story is that it got really messy, and I went back and forth in deciding, do I want to be a surgeon still, or do I want to pursue art finally? Listen to that call. And it involved me having so many different jobs. It involved me leaving my friends and family and moving across the world to Scotland for grad school to study human rights and international politics. I just assumed that if I went to grad school, everything would fall into place after, and I would know what I was supposed to do and how it was supposed to turn out, and I'd just be this important, meaningful person. And that's not how things played out. It got really messy, and I had college loans and debt for my master's degree, but what happened after that was 8 different jobs in the course of like 7 years. It was a big mess for a long time, and it didn't make sense to a lot of people, and certainly not me. But what happened is this amazing document, which is my resume, it makes 0 sense. And when people look at it, it's funny when I show it to people, I always feel like people must assume that I have like multiple personalities or something, because it makes no sense and it's all over the place. But what I see when I look at my resume actually is a process, and I see that journey that I lived of unpacking what was going on in my life and who I was, parts of me that I needed to understand in order to know what I could create with my life. But then eventually, when you're in the midst of that process, it's so messy and you're like, what is going on? Is my life ever going to make sense? But eventually you get to a point where you're able to look back at it, and kind of with some distance and some time, you're able to see sometimes this magical connection, this like magical thread that weaves things that didn't make sense at the time together. And with some distance, I feel like when we begin to recognize this happened because of that, and that couldn't have happened without this, and we start to find some order in the chaos, I think that's where the real magic happens, and that's where beautiful things are created, and amazing solutions are found, and truth is discovered, and in my opinion, where real creativity begins. I think most importantly, what begins to happen is that we begin to actually understand our own story and our own place in the world because of that. And once we begin to understand our own story and to know our own story, we begin to know what our place might be in this world, what our purpose might be. And for me, when I started calligraphy, I was actually 5 years into mourning my father's death. And it was, I was a year out of college, and I was terrified at the idea of having to process becoming an adult without his direction, without his guidance. And calligraphy actually started for me as a practice of remembering these words of wisdom that my dad had for me. It was a way of remembering. He was a poet, and his words were so good, and it was this practice of recalling those things. And I would have never thought that it would turn into a vocation. But several months ago, I was sitting at my desk, staring at a blank page, and I recalled this conversation. It was like soon after I decided to pursue calligraphy full-time, to finally quit the chaos and just like take the courageous step to do what I wanted to do. And I recalled this conversation. It was the last conversation I had with my father before he had a stroke and passed away. And it was before either of us knew that it was going to be our last conversation. He said, "Suzy, I like who you're becoming. I think I like who you're becoming, so just keep being true." And I recalled that in a moment of, after years and years of trying to understand who I was supposed to be, what my impact was supposed to be in the world. And it was a matter, it took years and years and so many wrong turns and a long process to get to that blank page and actually discover my story and know my story and be able to begin to offer that to the world. So as we go into this holiday season, I would just encourage you guys, we're going into the next week and might have more time to process than you normally do. And I would encourage you to look at the parts of your life that are unresolved, the parts that you're still trying to figure out, and maybe you've been trying to rush. And I'd encourage you to actually give yourself some grace and some time and some space in those places, because we only have one life to live, but we might as well make it a good one. And I'm a true believer that good things do take time. So I'm actually going to go ahead and introduce Carl now. Carl Kish is going to come up and blow your minds with some awesome, a different take on time.
Good morning, everyone. First off, I just want to say I'm very honored to be here. It was just a couple years ago that I was working for Grizzly. Does it show the Grizzly side there? Yeah, okay. And so I was watching these guys slave away at trying to get Creative Mornings to here. And it's just incredible in such a short amount of time what they've been able to achieve. So hats off to those guys and everyone else at Creative Mornings for bringing all you guys together each month. Something I'm truly thankful for. While I was at Grizzly, I was starting my own company called Stoke Certified, which is the world's first sustainability certification program for surf and ski tourism operators. And so for those of you who ever try to start a business while working part-time or full-time job on the side, know that takes a lot of time. I'm not here to talk about that and productivity. Kind of like Suzy said, it's difficult and you end up just working a lot of hours. I want to talk about a time in a different way that matters to all of us, and it's one of the main reasons why I started Stoke. And that's because time is a pretty sensitive subject for this pretty lady right here. She's definitely a keeper, but we haven't been treating her too well, and if we don't get our act together soon, she's going to kick us out and move on, and there's no honeymoon phase to this relationship. Now, I'm not here to talk about the doom and gloom about climate change and what can happen, so don't worry. I know this audience is well aware of what's at risk, and I think a better use of our time would be talking about solutions, because there is still a lot of time and stuff to be hopeful about. Recently, as of last Saturday, nearly 200 countries, after 2 weeks of intense negotiations at the UN's COP21 climate talks in Paris, for the first time in 20 years, came up with a legally binding agreement to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. in an effort to prevent us from going over 2 degrees Celsius in warming. And for those of you that don't know, if we don't stay below 2 degrees, it could be bad. But there is a lot of hope, and the Paris Agreement isn't perfect, but it's a step in the right direction. And we need to act quickly, though, to achieve this ambitious goal. Surprisingly, San Diego's been the first one to step up to the plate, and almost immediately. 4 days after the Paris Agreement, this past Tuesday, our city council voted to transition San Diego to 100% renewable energy and cut our greenhouse gas emissions in half by 2035. So that's definitely something to be proud of and be stoked about. And while that's great for us, there's still a lot of developing nations and low-lying island states and mountain communities that don't have the same resources and infrastructure that we do to be able to kind of overcome these barriers. And even though they're the most susceptible and vulnerable to the worst impacts of climate change, for a long time their voice hasn't been heard. But luckily, part of the Paris Agreement as well, they're requiring developed nations to raise $100 billion a year by 2020 for undeveloped nations to help them transform their economies towards renewable energy. So that's another big thing to be hopeful about for our future. But there's one other large population that doesn't have a say in how we use our time, and that's the next generation. What we do in the next 10 years will ultimately decide what the next 100 years will look like. And that deep concern about what kind of world we want to leave for our grandchildren is why we started Stoke Certified, in our own humble way to kind of make a difference in our community and our culture, to work with those surf and ski resorts in their respective communities to ensure that the same experiences or the ability to experience these unique cultures and beautiful landscapes will be there for generations to come. And although, like I said, our community and culture is really small scale in terms of the grand scheme of things with global population and other industries, we still think we can make a difference by resonating with surfers, skiers, and snowboarders' obsession with this really, really brief moment in time. That's called living in the moment. And be it in the barrel like this, or riding powder with your friends, this fleeting moment of self-expression and creativity and freedom is what we all live for, and it's truly indescribable, and when we try to explain it, we sound like this guy. So it should... Oh, there we go. So instead of sounding like a kook, we usually use the word stoke to kind of associate that feeling with one word. And we want to leverage the riding community's deep connection with kind of this split moment in time, this pure moment of bliss, to get them, to inspire them to think about the future and how we can preserve that moment in time forever. And hopefully just through simple things, by choosing like surf and ski resorts that are really taking creative approaches to overcoming the barriers of sustainability to make sure the next generation can have the same stoke, the same passion for preserving and protecting the places where we play. And I hope that's something that all of you in this room can take away from today, because you're all very talented and creative people. And no matter what your passion or profession is, and hopefully those are one and the same, I just ask that you please try and dedicate a little bit of your valuable time to make a difference for the ones who will inherit either our mess or our fortune. Thank you. I'd like to welcome Alex up to the stage.
Thank you, everyone. For the sake of time, again, we're talking about it. I kind of have to read most of this because I will definitely get off track very, very quickly. So when I started thinking about the concept of time, this might be a little hard to follow the lines of logic in this conversation, but just go with me real quick. I want to talk about Instagram, something that we all know very, very well. We use every single day. And for me, I recently have decided to virtually stop using it in general, and I kind of want to tell you why. And let me say really quickly too, by no means am I recommending that you need to do this yourself. I'm not getting paid by Twitter to eliminate your Instagram accounts, not yet. I might look into doing that, but I guess I just started taking inventory of how much mental energy and how much time that I was actually using with Instagram, and I started wondering why. And I guess through a series of conversations with some people that I really, really respect, I think I've finally distilled it to this. How much of the stuff that we interact with on social media platforms is distracting us from reality? And how much of it is encouraging you to actually engage in it? And for me, it seemed much more like a distracting tool than anything at that point in my life. And it gets kind of messy when you start interacting with the real stuff. So I just started thinking about it. I remember this NPR story that I had heard about a British opera director who was starting to bring back 14th and 15th century operas. And all the other directors at the time were, engaging in like the modern ones that were really entertaining, full of spectacle, so they could get people back into opera. And this director had this practice every single morning in the underground or the subway, and he would just sit there for 2 or 3 hours every morning and watch people. And the interviewer asked him, what's the point of doing that? You're an opera director, and you should probably be doing something else with your time. And the reason that he said that is that he wanted to observe real life dynamics of how people interacted with each other and then take that into the opera. And he had this theory about the purpose of art. And he said, you can either create something that distracts people, that just simply entertains them, or you can create something that forces you to engage with your current reality. Those are kind of two different paradigms with any form of art. And so I guess over a series of a few months, I began to realize that I had gotten to a place where I was consistently bombarding myself with the perception of everyone else's life and not really engaging in my own, kind of distracting myself quite a bit. So like any dude, I tried to do something about it to fix it, right? That's what dudes do. So I basically just stopped using Instagram. And I know that sounds a little ridiculous, but that was my first test. And I don't know if you know a guy named Jason Silva. Has anyone ever heard of that guy, Brain Games? I'm kind of obsessed with that guy right now, and he recently produced a video, and he talked about this study about how scientists have been studying the brains of improv jazz musicians and freestyle rappers. And they're doing these like fMR brain scans when they're doing their thing. And what happens is the part of the brain, it's called I think it's called the lateral prefrontal cortex for any nerds out there. It actually shuts down when they're doing their thing. So that part of the brain is responsible for self-editing. Like you're not able to like edit anything that comes out of your mouth, which is kind of scary. So they're concluding that is called pure creativity. Everything from your past experiences in your life comes out good or bad in that moment. So you can't really, put like a really nice filter or comment on it or hashtag and then push publish. It just happens. And so as I started thinking about what Jason was talking about, I started coming to terms with how do I self-edit in my own life, and how many times do I often let myself improv and let that stream of consciousness just come out, what would come out. And I got really excited about the idea of giving myself more time, more space to rediscover what actually makes me tick instead of looking at everyone else's life. And what I really started to learn was how imperative it is to set really healthy boundaries. And really the ultimate purpose of what I'm trying to say is the ability to say no. And I think because it's a 5-minute speech, you kind of have to insert a quote by somebody famous. So Warren Buffett, he once said that the difference between successful people and very successful people is that very successful people say no to almost everything. And in my head, I kind of equate successful people with healthy people. That's how I frame it in my head. And so by practicing the ability to say no and setting better boundaries with yourself, for me, something as simple as just saying I'm not using Instagram anymore, that was my approach. I'm kind of beginning to allow myself to not self-edit, and through that, I'm actually getting to know myself a little bit more. Fascinating stuff, right? And so I guess the biggest thing that I want to take away, for you to take away, is that when you start setting really healthy boundaries and when you start saying no, you really do get to know yourself in a way that maybe you didn't before. You can kind of focus. And I don't know if you knew this, but there's actually a limited amount of room in your brain. I looked on Google, and it's 2 to 3 gigabytes. And that's not very much. And I think at that point, you're going to be deleting photos to make room for other apps. So it's really not that much. And I I think knowing and acknowledging that, then you have to be really protective of what you put in there and how much you let in. So basically saying no is okay, because in the end, you'll have a lot more time to offer things and people that you can say yes to. And you'll just naturally be more authentic, you'll naturally be more honest, especially with the relationships you have and the things that you create. It'll be more natural to you. Yeah, and I guess the question at the end of the day is, what are the things that you need to start saying no to so that you can remember what really makes you tick, what you really want to do with your life. And I guess that's it. So thank you for your time.
Hello, my name is Brandon Steppe. And I'm gonna take 1 second to lift this ground loop isolator. All right. So, let's get going here. Uh-oh, going the wrong way. Am I? Ooh. I'm gonna give up in 2 seconds. Am I doing it the wrong way? I got it the wrong way. All right, here we go. All right, so my name is Brandon Steppe. I'm the executive director and founder of the David's Harp Foundation. So we'll kind of tell you what that means in a second. But before I tell you that, I want to tell you, there was a desk back there earlier this week. And I sat at that desk with a young man named Ricardo, who's a 10th grader at King Chavez High School, and really cool kid. He was contemplating dropping out of high school because he wants to follow his passion for art, right? A lot of us can kind of, we can connect with that because we're passionate about art, we're passionate about what we do. And so we sat down at that table back there and we had a real conversation about that not being a good idea, right? But we offered him another viable option in that he could go in that little secret door right there, and if he was willing to stay in school, I would allow him to trade his grades for studio time. So that's what we do at the David's Harp Foundation. In addition to that, there's a young lady the night before named Diane. And Diane is a local favorite of ours, wherever here's Hannah right here. She's the director of communications, Hannah. She's Hannah's favorite. She's been coming every Tuesday night. We run a program called Shelter Nights, where we allow storefront youth shelter youth to come into the studio if they check themselves in for the night. So because she's able to sing in the booth behind that wall over there, she's able to check herself in and get off the streets for the night, giving her that much more of a chance to escape sexual predators and just things that aren't good. So that's what we do at the David's Harp Foundation. I'm very excited to be here at Creative Mornings because we know the power of creativity and how we can harness that for youth. And Creative Mornings is doing the same thing for adults. So I think it's really cool to be here. I just want to say thank you. I also, as I was bullet pointing today, just to kind of a talk about time, or not today, but a couple days ago, I was listening to a man named David Jeremiah, and he was saying that as he speaks in public and as he reads his messages because he doesn't want to waste a single word, right? So I was like, I think that's a sign I need to read in 5 minutes. So I'm going to switch over to reading mode here and talk a little bit about time, if you don't mind. All right, so time is a very, very relevant topic in my life because as I wake up every morning, I personally strive to redeem the day wisely and use the time I'm given productively. And there's so much vying for my time, including my keys, which, like everybody that knows me knows, I lose them very frequently. But I got actually this little thing that actually finds my keys, but I need my phone to find it. And sometimes I lose my phone, so it's rough, but it's real. So thinking about this topic of time led me to a larger and more daunting topic. And then I had to kind of like flip my mind around to think about how it related. But the topic that I came to was endurance. And normally we think about endurance, we think about working harder, pressing through. But I'm here to tell you that there's certain things in life that you just can't work hard enough to get past, right? Who can work hard enough to get past bad times in life, right? There's certain things that happen and, you know, you can work as hard as you want, but it's not going to make that better, right? So I want to talk today about endurance as it relates to bad times. But before I can do that, I have to tell you about the last 10 years of my life. So if you're wondering how the last 10 years of my life relate right now, me being 25, and I was 15. Actually, I'm not 25, I'm 35. No, but, so there you go. All right, and anyway, excuse me. So 10 years ago, this July, I stepped out on faith and left a very nice corporate job. I was well paying to produce music full time. And after a business degree and 4 years of climbing the corporate ladder, it only took 6 months for my awesome wife to convince me that music was my calling and I needed to pursue that. So I cashed in my meager retirement and at a huge penalty, I might add, and converted a garage studio in Southeast San Diego converted a garage into a music studio in Southeast San Diego. Shortly after, I began allowing curious neighborhood youth to trade grades for studio time. And in 2007, it happened, right? And some of you guys weren't old enough to know that that happened, but there was a huge economic crisis. It was tough enough for my pride at the time that in order to pay my bills, my wife and I had to move in with my 90-year-old grandmother, but I was faced also with a wife who was now 3 months pregnant, morning sick, and going through the process of closing down her own professional organizing business due to the economic crisis. Oh, but wait, it gets tougher, right? So my Gap medical insurance was scheduled to end in mid her pregnancy, and my daughter Jasmine was prenatally diagnosed with Down syndrome, which was extremely tough day for the family that day. Then things went from bad to worse when I found out that my Gap insurance didn't cover the high-risk pregnancy that we were gonna have to endure. And so I found myself in an unthinkable place for a college-educated man, the welfare office, trying to get insurance for my wife. So I actually went in and I went to grab a ticket and I walked out, and I went back in, I went to grab a ticket and I walked out. And I was in tears as I grabbed the ticket because it's just what had to happen at the time, and it was very, 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 very rough, which you know. But nearly 2 years into my journey, I was faced with the real dilemma: either walk out on music, the kids that love the studio more than their own homes, and my own calling, or endure, right? Endure, right? So I did what any passionate and creative young person would have done. I dusted off my suit and went to get a job in pharmaceutical sales. And I really did. I really did that. So I made it all the way to the fourth and final interview with AstraZeneca, and as I was driving to the last interview, I found myself pulling over because I couldn't see the road through tears. So I turned around and went back to the garage studio. And that was really a defining moment for me as an artist, but more than that, just as a man. Where were we? Sorry. As a man. I think that was unscripted too, so that's why I'm having a hard time. All right. So it was a defining moment, not because I was so strong to make the decision to follow my dreams through adversity, but because I realized that the commitment that I made was bigger than me, and I had no right not to go back. Moment for tears, sorry. All right, I could talk all day about endurance because that was just one of the many storms that I've endured over the years and over the past 10 years in my journey of art and purpose. But I think it all comes down to this equation that we must consider, and I'm gonna skip through a couple slides here to get to it. There we go. There it is. Passion plus X equals endurance. All right. If passion is constant and endurance is the goal, then what is your X, right? Whoa. What is your X? That's the question, because if we're gonna get to the place where we can continue to press into our art, we're gonna go through rough times, right? And most of us, except for Sam and Emily, aren't lawyers, so, you know, we're gonna have to press forward, right? So what is your X? My X was my faith in God. If I didn't have that, I would have been somewhere else, and all this stuff over here wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't know Hannah. I wouldn't know the kids that come in every day and that get a chance to take advantage of what we do. So that was my ex, but what is your ex? So I stand here, having weathered that trial and many others so that I can have impactful conversations with students. Excuse me. Uh-oh. Sorry. So I can have impactful conversations with students. So we built out an industry standard recording facility, and we've been able to actually work with 142 homeless youth and inspire a beautifully diverse group of students representing all walks of life and 3 downtown high schools. And yet, as I stand before you, like most young nonprofit startups, we're financially about 3 months away from closing our doors, and this is the place that the students call home. In addition to that, at this very moment, my wife, who's right there on Skype, say hi to my wife, she's on Skype. Hi, wife. Hi, wife. I love you. She's actually in the hospital right now with multiple sclerosis-like syndrome, symptoms, excuse me. And so how do we endure through these things is the question. So creative people of San Diego, I just want to ask you, and I want you to really consider, because if we're going to do this, let's do it, right? What's your X? What's going to allow you to add to your passion in order for you to endure? And I really want you to think about that. And I encourage you this morning to find out if you already haven't. So thank you.